The Snow Queen, written by Hans Christian Andersen, illustrated by Bernadette Watts. Prologue. One day the devil was high in spirits, for he had created a mirror that made everything good and beautiful, reflected in it shrink to almost nothing, and everything bad and ugly stand out more clearly than ever. All the little imps who went to the devil's school ran around with the mirror, until at last there was nowhere and no one that had not been distorted in it. The devil was much amused, and the mirror itself grinned wickedly. Then the little imps decided to fly up to heaven to make fun of God and his angels. The higher they carried the mirror, the more they grinned, until at last they were shaking so hard with laughter that it slipped out of their hands and fell to earth, where it broke into millions and millions of pieces. And then it caused even more trouble than before, because all the tiny splinters, scarcely the size of a grain of sand, went flying around the world. And whenever a splinter flew into anyone's eye, it had the same power as the whole mirror and made people see everything distorted. Sometimes a splinter of glass even entered someone's heart, which was worst of all, for then that person's heart was turned to ice, as we will now hear. Once upon a time, two poor children lived in an old city. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other as if they were. The boy was called Kay, and the girl's name was Gerda. They lived in two attic rooms opposite each other. In summer, they could climb over the rooftops to play together. There were roses growing in the window boxes, and the two children often sang a song, which went, "In the vale grow roses wild, where we meet the Holy Child." One winter day, when the windows were frozen over, the children were playing in the snow outside. "Ow!" cried Kay. "Something pricked my heart, and something flew into my eye." But when Gerda looked, she couldn't see anything. "I think it's gone now," said Kay, but it hadn't gone. A splinter of the devil's mirror had just flown into his heart. "Why are you crying?" he asked Gerda roughly. "It makes you look so ugly." And then he ran away. As Kay ran down the street, a big white sleigh came driving along. It carried someone wrapped in white furs and was drawn by white horses. Kay tied his little sleigh to the big one and rode along too. Soon both sleighs were going out of the city gates. The snow was falling fast, and Kay wanted to untie his sleigh, but he couldn't. The horses ran fast as the wind, and the snowflakes grew larger and larger. Then the white sleigh stopped, and the driver rose. She was covered with snow, and now Kay recognized her. She was the Snow Queen. "You're freezing," said the Snow Queen, and she wrapped Kay in her fur coat and lifted him into the sleigh with her. Then she kissed him on the forehead. That kiss was colder than ice and went straight to his heart. For a moment, Kay thought he was dying, but then he felt better. He forgot all about Gerda and his parents, and he no longer felt the cold. Soon they were flying through the air, high among the clouds, over woods and lakes, over land and sea, while the cold wind blew and wolves howled below them. When Kay did not come home that evening or the next, Gerda was in despair. She searched the whole city, but nobody had seen Kay. Gerda wept bitterly. It was a long, sad winter for her. But when spring came, Gerda put on her new red shoes to go to the river and look for Kay. "Did you take my friend away?" she asked the river. "I will give you my new red shoes, my greatest treasure, if you will give him back to me," she said. She got into a boat lying by the bank and threw her shoes into the water. The river did not reply. However, the boat was not tied up, and it moved slowly away from the bank. Seeing this, Gerda wanted to jump out, but it was too late. The boat drifted away on the current, going faster and faster. Gerda was frightened, and she began to cry. "Perhaps the river is taking me to Kay," she thought after a while, and she stopped crying. The boat drifted to the bank, where Gerda saw a thatched house standing in a cherry orchard. She called out, and an old woman came out of the house. The old woman drew the boat to the bank with a shepherd's crook and smiled at Gerda. "Poor child, why are you drifting down the great river?" asked the old woman. She helped Gerda out of the boat, and Gerda shared her sad story. The old woman said Kay had not yet passed that way, but might do so any day. She took Gerda's hand, led her into the little house, and gave her delicious cherries to eat. As Gerda ate the cherries, the old woman combed her hair with a golden comb, and gradually the little girl forgot her lost playmate. This old woman was an enchantress, but not a wicked one. She only worked a little magic for her own pleasure. She wanted to keep little Gerda with her because she was so lonely, so she hurried out into the garden and touched the beautiful roses with her magic crook, and they all sank into the earth. She did not want them to remind Gerda of her home with the roses growing in the window boxes, for that would remind her of Kay, and then she would go away. The old woman took Gerda into her flower garden. How beautiful and how fragrant it was! It had every flower you could imagine. Gerda played in the flower garden for days. She knew every flower in it. Even though there were so many, she thought one flower was missing, though she did not know which. Then one day she saw a rose on the old woman's sun hat, a rose the enchantress had forgotten. Gerda ran into the garden. Kay! Kay, I was going to look for Kay, she cried. And she began to weep. As her tears fell on the ground, the roses grew again. Roses, do you know where Kay is? Do you think he's dead? Gerda asked them. We have been down underground, but your Kay wasn't there, said the roses. He is not dead. How happy Gerda was. She ran straight out of the old enchantress's flower garden into the wide world to look for Kay. As Gerda left the kind old enchantress's garden, she left summer behind her too. In the forest, the leaves on the trees were golden. Oh, I have wasted so much time, sighed Gerda, and she ran on and on until her feet were tired and sore and she had to rest. Suddenly a crow came hopping up to her. Caw, caw, called the crow, flying ahead. Thinking the bird would lead her to Kay, Gerda followed it. They came to an avenue where the leaves were falling one after another. A castle stood at the end of it. Caw, caw, called the crow again, and it disappeared into the castle. As Gerda followed, her heart beat quickly. They went through many magnificent rooms until they reached a bedchamber with 2 golden beds in it. A princess lay in one, a prince lay in the other, but there was no little Kay. Gerda was sad, but the princess was very kind and asked Gerda to share her story. We will help you as much as we can, the prince and the princess told her, and they dressed Gerda in silk and velvet and gave her warm fur boots and a muff for her journey. Outside the castle gate stood a coach of pure gold, driven by a fine coachman. The princess helped Gerda into the coach and wished her luck, and off she went again in search of Kay. Gerda rode through a dark forest where the golden coach glowed like a torch. Some robbers saw it and rushed over to it. Gold, they cried, pure gold! And they seized the horse's reins, took the coachman prisoner, and pulled little Gerda out of the coach. Suddenly, a little robber girl appeared. I want to play with that girl, she cried. I want her to give me her muff and her clothes and sleep in my bed with me. I want to ride in that coach. And the robber girl pushed Gerda into the coach, tore her muff out of her hands, and told her to take her boots off. Then they drove down, further into the woods. Are you a princess? Asked the little robber girl. No, said Gerda, and she told the little robber girl her story and how much she loved Kay. The coach stopped in the yard of the robber's castle, which was half in ruins, with ravens and crows flying out of the holes in the walls. You shall sleep with me tonight, said the little robber girl, and now she took a long knife out of a crack in the wall. She laughed. What is the knife for? Asked Gerda, frightened. I always sleep with the knife beside me, said the little robber girl. You never know what may happen. And she went to sleep with one arm around Gerda's neck and the knife in the other hand. But Gerda could not sleep. Then the doves began to coo. Coo, 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 we have seen little Kay. He is in the Snow Queen's sleigh, riding away above the treetops. Coo, coo, ask the reindeer. He knows the Snow Queen's realm. Gerda looked out the window and saw a reindeer peering in. Yes, my home is far in the north, said the reindeer, where we run free in the great valleys. Even farther north, the Snow Queen pitches her summer tent. You have seen Kay? He is with the Snow Queen? Then he's still alive. Oh, Kay, I will go north and look for you, whispered Gerda, and she went to sleep at last, with new hope in her heart. Early in the morning, Gerda told the robber girl all that the doves had said, and the robber girl decided to let Gerda go and take the reindeer with her. And here are your fur boots, said the little robber girl, because it will be cold, but I'll keep them up. It's too pretty for me to give it away. However, I don't want you to freeze, so here are my mother's big mittens, and 2 loaves and a ham so you won't go hungry. The robber girl led the reindeer out of the castle. She put Gerda on the animal's back, saying, Off you go and take care of the little girl. Then the reindeer galloped away into the forest with Gerda. Gerda waved her hand in the big mitten and heard the robber girl call goodbye. Then they raced away over stumps and stones, over swamps and plains, and through the great forest as fast as the reindeer could go. The reindeer ran on with Gerda day and night. She ate her loaves and she ate her ham. At last they came to Finland. The reindeer took Gerda to an old Finnish woman who knew all the secrets of the far north. They went into her cottage, which was so hot that Gerda had to take off her fur boots and her thick mittens. The woman put a piece of ice on the reindeer's head, And then the reindeer told her Gerda's story. "I know how wise you are," said the reindeer. "Can't you give this little girl a potion that will make her strong enough to overcome the Snow Queen?" The Finnish woman took the reindeer into a corner and whispered to him, "Kay is very happy with the Snow Queen. He is under her spell and has forgotten his parents and little Gerda." "But couldn't you let Gerda have something to give her power against the Snow Queen's magic?" asked the reindeer. "I can give her no more power than she already has," said the Finnish woman. "Don't you see how powerful she is? Even the wild robber girl granted her wishes. Her power lies in her loving heart. But listen, the Snow Queen's realm begins 2 miles from here. Take the little girl to the big bush with the red berries, and then hurry back before it gets too cold for you." After saying this, the Finnish woman put Gerda on the reindeer's back, and off they ran as fast as he could. "Oh, I have left my boots behind, and my mittens too!" cried Gerda as the cold stabbed her like a knife. But the reindeer dared not turn back. On and on he ran. When they reached the bush with the red berries, Gerda climbed down to the ground. The reindeer kissed her, and the big shiny tears ran down his cheeks. Then he ran back to the Finnish woman as fast as he could go, for he feared the Snow Queen's icy realm. There stood poor Gerda, barefoot in the middle of that terrible ice-cold country. It was so cold she could see her own breath. In her despair, little Gerda prayed. When she had said the Lord's Prayer, she was surrounded by angels, who drove away the snow and the cold. Gerda went boldly on, straight into the snowstorm, for she knew the Snow Queen's palace must lie where the snow fell most thickly. It was cold and gleaming in the Snow Queen's magnificent palace. The driven snow had made the palace walls, the biting winds had made its doors and windows. The palace halls lay cold and empty in the northern light. Kay was all alone in one of them, playing with hard, shiny pieces of ice. Then Gerda came into the palace, saw Kay, and flung her arms around his neck. "Kay, dear Kay," she cried, holding him tight, "I found you at last." But Kay sat there cold and still, as if he were frozen. At that, Gerda wept hot tears. They fell on Kay's breast and flowed into his heart. They melted the lump of ice there and dissolved the splinter of glass. Kay looked at Gerda, and she began to sing. "In the vale grow roses wild, where we meet the Holy Child." Then Kay burst into tears, and he wept so much that the tiny piece of glass from the mirror floated out of his eye. He recognized Gerda. "Gerda, dear little Gerda, where have you been so long?" he cried. "And where have I been?" And he looked around him. "What a big, empty place this is, and it's so cold. I'm freezing." Then he clung to Gerda, and they laughed and wept for joy. Gerda kissed Kay's cheeks, and the color came back into them. She kissed his eyes, and they were wet like hers. She kissed his hands and feet, and he felt warm again. They held hands and left the castle, talking about the roses at home. Wherever they passed, the icy winds died down and the sun came out. When they came to the bush with the red berries, the reindeer was waiting with a sleigh and some warm clothes the Finnish woman had given him. He took them both to the borders of that cold land. Here the first green shoots were emerging, and here they parted. "Goodbye," called the reindeer. The first little birds were beginning to sing, and the buds in the wood were green. Spring had come. Hand in hand, Gerda and Kay began their journey back. On their way, they met the little robber girl. "A fine sort of fellow you are, wandering around like that," she said to Kay. "I wonder if it was worth going to the ends of the earth just for you. Tell me what happened, Gerda, and how you found Kay." So Gerda and Kay told their story, and the little robber girl smiled and took their hands, and promised that if she ever came to their city, she would visit them. Then she rode away into the forest. Next, Gerda came to the castle where the prince and princess lived, and they were magnificently entertained there. Wherever they went, spring broke out. Finally, in the distance, they heard church bells ringing and saw the tall towers of the city where they lived. They came into the city and then to their home. They climbed the stairs and went in and found everything just as it used to be. But as they walked in through the doorway, they realized they were grown up now. There were roses at the open window. Kay and Gerda held hands. They had forgotten the cold magnificence of the Snow Queen's realm as if it were a bad dream. Looking into each other's eyes, they understood the old song. "In the vale grow roses wild, where we meet the Holy Child." There they stood happily, grown up yet still children at heart, and it was summer, warm, glorious summer.